Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, and a very good evening to you all. I'd like to start by thanking the organizers for organizing this debate and indeed the opportunity. When I was first called up, they mentioned would I like to debate against a communist or a socialist about economy, and I thought that had kind of died off. It brought back memories to me of the mid-1980s, long hair, sideburns and sandals, but anyway, here we are this evening, and I also have a confession. I'm not really here to debate specific points of communist doctrine, although if there are any particular questions, I will certainly deal with them in the second part of the debate. What I will say, however, is that Islamic economic solutions are very distinctive. Some people confuse Islam with socialist thought because there are some similarities, and I will highlight some of those similarities, but they are a very distinctive way of life, as indeed, of course, it is from liberal, secular, democratic, capitalist thought as well. And that's not to say that Islam is in the middle of some debate between the left and the right. Islam is very unique, very distinctive. Now, the topic tonight is the free market, and I have problems with the concept of free because I think it is an abused term. When we look today, we see free money, we see free spending, we see free growth, we see free banking, of all things. We see risk-free gambling. And maybe the biggest myth is the free wealth accumulation for all via the process of using interest. This is very dangerous. So the notion of a free market, I would say, let's look about notions of rule of law and how you actually implement a free market before we start using these pejorative terms. Islam has a very well-defined and clear rule of law, including in its economic principles. So I would like today to build a case on some of the matters which are of greatest relevance for us in this very difficult times. Here we are, 4 or 5 years after this major financial crisis in which the world economy is suffering. We're going through double or triple dip recessions. Globally, there is a growth problem. Poverty, unemployment is a growing issue. And everyone is asking what are the solutions. So this is what I really want to tackle tonight. So let me start with free money. There is no free lunch. The UK is the most indebted nation in the world. If you include from the financial sector, government and personal debt, the UK hits the record. It's not a very good record to have, I might add. More than 500% of GDP. The US has 16.7 trillion in debt, and that's before we look at its unfunded liabilities, things like many pension provisions, Medicare, Medicaid, and so on. Since 1913, the US has lost 97% of the value of the dollar. That's since the time that the Federal Reserve came into existence. And the UK is in a similar position. $110 trillion of money was created in the 10 years in the run-up to the latest financial crisis. These are not sustainable matters. The US dollar has declined by more than 10% per annum in value when compared with gold since 1971, since Nixon unilaterally took them off the gold standard. So, again, the first point is there's no free lunch. We are devaluing our currency at a rapid rate. The only solution for this is to return to a gold and silver standard as Islam dictates. And again, just to end this point, in reference to Lenin, Keynes himself said, he said, there is no subtler, no surer means of overturning the existing basis of society than to debauch the currency. The process engages all the hidden forces of economic law on the side of destruction and does it in a manner which not one man in a million is able to diagnose. He said, through inflation, governments can confiscate secretly and unobserved an important part of the wealth of their citizens. And we have a new dynamic, which is governments changing the way they calculate inflation, so further deception is involved. My second point, this corrupt banking system, which is based on a fiat currency, has opened the doors, the floodgates in fact, to a political system which has enabled them to have an open checkbook. Now, I don't have a problem with many aspects of the welfare state. In fact, many parts of it were very important post-World War II in this country, and the establishment of the National Health Service and many other important things. However, it is out of control. The spending is completely out of control. Whether you are from the left or the right, people are waking up to the fact. But unfortunately, the way it is being tackled will hurt the poorest most. Austerity is the new buzzword when it comes to this. There is another way. In Islam, when people fall on hard times, whether it's unemployment or lack of benefits and so on and so forth, difficulties which people face, you have to realize, number one, that there is an obligation for every male that is mature and able-bodied to work. An obligation. Number two, families also have an obligation to support family members when they fall on hard times. So the first social net comes within the family unit. Number three, the state is the final backstop, including the provision of basic health care and education provision. But that is the key. It is a final backstop, not the first thing that people go looking to. And the reason why we have this is because we have a society which has been built on individualism. The family unit is breaking down, day by day, month by month. We are becoming a fragmented society. It is pernicious. Everyone for himself, and let the devil take the hindmost. This is one key reason why we have such a dramatic requirement in terms of this social net, in terms of this welfare system, which is now getting so large. I turn to my third point, and I think the most important point today. We have a growth crisis globally. We have what I believe a rather false dichotomy between spend and austerity and people thinking about how we're going to get the economy moving again. There is another critical side to this debate. How are we going to generate growth? In Islam, in the Quran, Surah Al-Hashr, Allah says, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, in order that it does not merely make a circuit between the wealthy amongst you. Surah Al-Hashr. So the circulation of wealth is absolutely critical in terms of solving this problem. If you take money out of circulation in Islam, you will lose 2.5% of it every year in zakat. It is that simple. You think about what that does to the economy, what it has done to the economy, in the Islamic economy over centuries. Hoarding is expressly forbidden in the Quran. What does that mean? It means that if you're blessed with wealth, if you're a successful businessman, if you've generated a lot, you have three options with this wealth. You will either invest, you will either spend, or you will gift that wealth. Whereas we are in this trap of the cyclical behavior of bust and boom, in which in the deflationary periods, in the downturn cycles, the wealthy are taking that wealth out of circulation. No wonder it is so difficult to get things moving. And who trusts each other when so much of this wealth is flooding through the banking system as a conduit? Land is also subject to this. In Islam, we have a principle, use it or lose it. If you have agricultural land and you don't use it for 3 years, it will be taken from you. And then it will be available for redistribution to anyone that needs land. Very radical idea. Very dynamic idea. Not only that, unused lands, dead lands. If you can fence that land, you can use it. Not only that, the tax around this encourages circulation of wealth, encourages land utilization. Kharaj, ushur, are taxes on the productive capacity of the land. So you will be assessed on what that land should be generating. So that, of course, creates an incentive for you to use that land. My fourth point. Interest, usury in Islam is absolutely forbidden. There's nothing new in that point. But just ponder for one moment. This particular crisis that we are living through has laid bare for all to see, very simply, the complete fallacy of this notion of interest. Put aside your textbooks, put aside your ideas and notions in terms of the importance of the value of the interest, the value of money put over interest in terms of the investment dynamic. Through the Mervyn Kings and the Ben Bernanke's of this world, we have zero interest rate policies. They are using this to try to stimulate something in the economy. All the while, the politicians, through the problem of the democratic system and the re-election system, are not going to tackle spending. I have great difficulty in tackling their spending with their fiscal cliff and their austerity measures. Because they have this money printing spigot. So the myth of interest rates and the necessity of interest rates in a zero interest rate policy world is now being exposed. But where are these zero interest rates, you may ask? If you go to a bank, you want a loan, they'll charge you 10%. If you have a credit card, they'll charge you 25 or 30%. If you're unfortunate enough to go to the moneylender, the friendly moneylender, he will charge you 2,000%. So the notion of zero interest rate is something that is given to the banking system and is not given to anyone else. So we can do away with this interest system. We can do away with it because there is a better way. A way that will encourage open, free circulation of wealth, which is an investment model, which is based upon Islamic principles, which is that you have a proper sharing of risk and reward through equity and partnership type arrangements, rather than fixed income type arrangements, which are dominated by a banking system. My last point, again, gambling. Gambling in all its forms are forbidden. We have a monstrous, unstable elephant in the room called the derivatives market today. More than $1 quadrillion, 1 and 18 zeros after it if you try and count it, 20 times the size of the world economy. As Aaron Brown once said, he said, "It is not that gambling imitates economic life, but that economic life is largely modeled after gambling." The derivatives market, despite what the bankers will tell you in terms of hedgings of risks and so on and so forth, is not a participation in the market of equities or bonds or foreign exchange. It is a market based upon the movement of other measures, equities, bonds, markets, the weather, sports results, horse racing, it doesn't matter. It's based upon the performance of other matters. This gambling on this scale, we saw in 2008, the implication of that. You would have thought people would wake up and say, wait a second, we have a big problem here. No, it has been conveniently pushed under the carpet. But that quadrillion-dollar elephant in the room is still there, and it is not being tackled. And this, I fear, will take the whole economy down, and it is far too big for us to ignore. These are just a few basic points which Islam has to say about this problem. I welcome the opportunity to deal with questions later. Thank you.
Well, after that very well prepared and very informative speech, I'm afraid I'm going to be a bit of a disappointment. Maybe I've got the virtue of showing that socialists and communists still exist. So, contrary to what Jamal might have expected, and also I'm a bit out of my depth. I've never addressed any kind of CIA before. The other point is so much of what Jamal said I actually agree with, and I think, I wish he was, I think 3/4 of what he was saying was on the same side as what I would like to say. After all, people of the left, we face prejudice. I mean, economics, I work in University College London, has good people in it, it has bad people, and it also has the ugly. The ugly mostly seem to, they predominate in the economics department, and I find myself very isolated there. They appointed me, they didn't realise I was a socialist, they've been kicking themselves. And by the same token, you see it's got this stamp, it says it's secular, and made an enormous fuss about there being a prayer meeting for Muslims and so on. So I feel very much on the same side of the fence at the time, and I think in the world as a whole today, those who oppose capitalism and imperialism are often standing side by side with the Muslim peoples struggling for their own ideals. So anyway, I was asked to speak about economic issues. These are issues that affect people's material life. And for socialists, the big central kind of question throughout the history of the last 4,000, 5,000 years has been that mankind manages to produce more than is necessary for actual subsistence. So what happens on average, obviously some people botch their work and complete failure, but on average people produce by their labour more than actually they need for their own consumption. So what happens to that surplus? Well, that's a big question, and economic issues have very largely revolved around that through history. And of course, by and large, mostly the way society has developed, that surplus has been grabbed by the wealthy, the strong, and those who have taken advantage of that situation to exploit the weak and the poor. So, socialism, it aims to create a society in which that surplus is not grabbed by such elements, but is administered collectively and democratically in the interest of mankind as a whole. This doesn't mean that people can't strive for some material benefits, and that motive will also be there, but the aim is to create a society in which, by and large, people in their work are motivated by their ideals rather than by material, for material gain. So I believe that all great religions of this world basically stand on that same principle. I wish I was better acquainted with Muslim principles on economics. I have some knowledge and interest in Christian principles, and Christ, as you know, has high status as a prophet within Islam. So it's worth pointing out Christ's teaching were very definitely communistic. He said you have your food, you have your clothing, and whatever is left, you give it to the poor. And the Quran also is full of equivalent kind of statements, though I'm sure Jamal is making a much more detailed and considered analysis of such issues. At the time of, in Muhammad's own time, the surplus actually available was very limited, so that it was not actually possible for a very dominant exploitative ruling class to exist. There were people with more prestige and standing in society, but by no means to the extent that they have existed since. And in the early caliphs' time, a surplus began to accumulate as a result of the expansion of Islam and the gains that came in from the early wars through which Islam expanded. But these were initially, under the Caliph Abu Bakr, they were distributed very strictly equally. Under the Caliph Omar, there was some extra distributed to those who had converted to Islam earlier. But that was not to say that they were, to indicate that they were motivated by material gain. I'm sure they would have been insulted if if that had been the idea. They were motivated in their actions by their faith. So I don't believe that in any great religion, at least for Islam, there can be any kind of a justification for capitalism of any kind. As I've said, pretty much everything I've said so far I see as compatible with what Jamal has said. If there is a debate between us, I think it focuses on where the particular wealth comes from that people benefit from. Jamal was mentioning that within Islam one participates in profit making through equity arrangements and so on. That still, to me, is an area of debate, because after all, the common labourer, the common worker, does not own their means of production, what in socialism we call means of production. The factories, the land, the ships, you name it. By definition, by going to work, they're producing wealth for somebody else. They are perpetuating the system of exploitation through which they suffer. So perhaps in further debate, Jamal can indicate how the principles he put forward relate to that. I'm not clear on that. Then finally, communism, socialism historically has been associated with atheism in the past. Now there are reasons for that which I would hope you might understand. Largely, I think this is something which applied to a previous historical period. Great thinkers of socialism, Marx, Engels, and so on, and Lenin, they were writing at a time when the Christian church was being used by a very exploitative and dictatorial ruling class to try to shackle people's minds and keep them down, and to try to justify their system of exploitation. So there was great antagonism then to the church, and it's really within that context that this association with atheism took place. But I don't see why that should be the case today. As I started off saying, I'm on the left. I'm not a religious person as such, but I have my ideals, and I find myself standing on the same side as religious people, particularly Muslim people, but also progressive Christian people as well a lot of the time. So I think it's very interesting and a valuable contribution that in what Jamal was talking about, he discusses some quite technical economic issues, but he discusses them in terms of faith, in terms of ideals, in terms of spiritual values, and that is something which I think is a valuable contribution, because the kind of economists I come across don't do that, far from it. So there we are then. I think we have common ground. We must explore it further. We must find where our ideas are the same and where they're different. I feel very ignorant about it, and I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot more than I've taught tonight. But by and large, I think we should stand together. We are against the exploitation by the rich and powerful of the poor and weak of the world. So surely that's a lot that we can stand together on. Thanks.
Thank you. We know that Marx said famously that from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. And we know that the Soviet Union was modeled along that sort of philosophy. But 20 odd years ago, Soviet Union disappeared. Do you think socialism has any more relevance to 21st century? And I have no background in economics, but what I can see is that it's disappeared into the history, and I suspect it's not going to come back anymore. So perhaps those solutions from socialism are rather irrelevant in 21st century. I wonder what your views are, and perhaps whether you can see any relevance to these ideas.
All right. Well, thanks. The capitalist system that arose, it took hundreds of years really to break through from the social system which had existed before of feudalism, and there were movements forward and backward and so on. I think in the early days of the Soviet Union, there was a lot of kind of over-optimism. People were carried away and thought that now that there was a revolution, within a few years there'd be a wonderful world federation of socialist republics, and capitalism would come to an end. That has not been the case, and socialism has faced enormous setbacks. I think that I don't know where you get the idea that socialism has disappeared. There are enormous groundswells of socialistic thinking, and particularly in anti-imperialist contexts like Latin America. Yesterday's funeral of Chavez in Venezuela demonstrated an enormous feeling that the poor and the weak of the world should inherit the world. And in East Asia, we see big contradictions within China about whether it's going to actually slide back into capitalism, or whether there are possibilities for pulling back some of the gains of socialism. There is a very militant socialist system existing in the northern half of Korea. Cuba has stood up against the United States, only 90 miles away or something, for a very impressive long time. So there's enough there to keep me optimistic, though the failure of the Soviet Union actually to consolidate a socialist system obviously was quite a devastating disappointment. But in the light of history, I think the basic fact that the vast majority of mankind are exploited by a small handful of rich and powerful, that contradiction is bound to work its way out in one way or another.
Thank you. If I can see the hands. There's a person in the back there with the glasses, t-shirt. Sorry, keep your hands up so I'll try and go in orders.
Hi there. I think sometimes when people see Islam and socialism, they think there's a lot to share. One of the rallying calls for socialism has been apparently equity, or the view of socialism is a very egalitarian or fraternal society. But I think those dreams, I guess you could make freely view that they've been grossly unfulfilled. And I think in the past, Stalin, I think once famously quipped that millions have been blotted off the landscape in efforts to collectivism. So I think while I think there's a danger, well, I guess as a Muslim, from the point of view where I think Islam is seen similar to socialism because of the nature of egalitarianism, or the equity point of view. But maybe I'd like Jamal to actually explain more where the ideological differences are. Maybe on face value there seems to be similarity, but I think historically the socialist account and the evidence of the Islamic account differ greatly.
Okay, thank you. If I could ask all both the floor and the panelists to try and keep their questions and answers brief, we can get as much mileage.
Yeah, I'll just say very briefly is that notions of imposed forms of equality, and I know that there's big debates between socialists and communists and others in terms of how that imposition of forms of equality, again, Dr. Goodacre mentioned the surplus wealth and the redistribution of the surplus wealth. There's a massive problem with that, is that it kills ambition. You know, people do not have the ambition to actually generate wealth and to be successful. You know, why bother? You know, why would somebody want to work or to be successful? I think this is what historically did happen in many of these early experimentations with communism. So we need an ownership model which is fair, which does not lead towards these massive imbalances of wealth. And one of those, of course, is the Islamic one, which has elements of redistribution based upon tax, zakat, but more importantly, what I touched on earlier, the notion of recirculation of wealth, meaning that as long as you're not taking the wealth out of circulation, as long as you're not hoarding that wealth, which is a massive problem in our society today, then it will be reinvested, or it will be spent, or it will be gifted. And that dynamic, rather than potentially say just gifting, i.e. taking the wealth forcefully from people, removing their ability to own the means of production, again will kill that ambition and basically deaden that society and not achieve its objectives in terms of that circulation of wealth.
Thank you, Jamal. Sorry, keep your hands up and we'll come to you. Seems to be no one on the left side. Okay, I did say I'll come to that gentleman up front, and then the person with a brown cap, and then the person with the red jumper. We'll take a few together. Please mention who you're directing your question to.
Thank you very much to both Jamal and Hugh. This is directed at Hugh, and it comes from my limited knowledge of socialist economics. But as far as I know, that the factors of production, labour being one of them, is allocated by the state. So correct me if I'm wrong. Does that not sort of completely stifle the consumer's choice, being one of the things of socialist economics? And secondly, also, because there's a top-down approach, technology is, as we know, sort of really vastly sort of growing. How does the sort of socialist model allow technology to sort of be implemented?
Sorry, to the next person, please. I'll pass the mic to the next one. Keep your hands up. I think it was a person with a brown cap.
Well, yeah, I'd like to ask Mr. Hughes as well. The way you've pointed out socialism, it's highly dependent on human ideals and wanting everyone to acquire at least some kind of wealth society. But I mean, doesn't this lead to some kind of total prisoners dilemma in which, I mean, as a Muslim, I'm obliged to give for people in needs. But if not, let's say you're an honest person, a good person, okay? But how do we get everyone in society? How do we achieve the goal that everyone in society at least contributes something to society?
Sorry, this question is again for you. It's from my interaction with people, with colleagues from Eastern Europe, I get the impression that people stopped, the communism as an economic system failed because the people themselves stopped embracing it. So that's one of the reasons. So looking forward, because we just need to personalize the issue, in the society that we live in, as discussed, is very individualistic. Do you see any relevance in this system coming back in this society or any society around the world? I mean, in the Western societies. Thank you.
We'll give a chance to well, second question. Just keep going for a moment, I think. So, the examples of socialism that we've seen, they've all existed under some kind of a blockade. They've all existed in conditions where they've been encircled by very aggressive and very militarized forces of capitalism and infrastructure. And as history has happened, they tended to happen in countries without a strong infrastructure of what we call civil society, with democratic institutions and so on. They haven't arisen in, for example, in England, where there's been the vote for nearly a couple of 100 years and so on. They've been in countries often subjected to backward and feudal kinds of rule, and really trying to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, kind of thing. So the examples we've had have been heroic, maybe, but in many cases failure. As for Eastern Europe, the People's Republics of Eastern Europe were set up after the Second World War, very much on the basis of the victories of the Soviet Red Army, rather than on the basis of democratic uprisings within those countries themselves. The kind of scenes we've seen in Venezuela this last week, that wasn't the kind of atmosphere in which the governments were set up, say, in Poland and places like that. So the hearts of the people were not fully captured in many cases, so that when, as soon as Soviet power started to fall, they broke free from it. They associated these socialist systems with foreign domination, and indeed the socialist systems haven't been very successful or consolidated. They've been undermined and corrupted both from outside and from within. As for whether I can envisage socialist revolution in this country, it's capitalism which produces the crises which have to be solved. You know, I don't go out there and say, oh, it'd be nicer if we had a socialist world. Capitalism is out there, and as Jamal has outlined, it's just not a sustainable system. So together, whether through Muslim means or socialistic means, or on those areas where we cooperate, we have to construct an alternative. It's not our chance. It's not our decision.
Okay, I have a written question here. That's a valid method. I didn't mention I'll accept it. Isn't there a big difference between Islamic economics and secular ideologies, such as the basis of Islamic economics being the submission to Allah? This is for Jamal.
Yeah, I touched on in my talk is that Islam is a very unique and distinctive way of life. And the core principle in Islam is Tawheed, which is belief in the oneness of God. And it's an article of faith that we believe in God, and we believe the Quran is the word of God, and that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is the last messenger of God. And the source of law, the source of whether economic, political, social, international, etc., is those sources, the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, from that basis, it's very nice of you to invite us to his belief, but sorry, our basis as a Muslim is belief in God. So, from that sources, we have an understanding of not only the rule of law, but the source of that law, and that's enough to invalidate these other secular man-made ideologies. Having said that, it is also interesting to debate the points, because Islamic law is Islamic law, but when we look at it in relation to these problems, and I hope that's what we can achieve this evening, is that we can see practical, workable solutions which have functioned for hundreds and hundreds of years. You know, yes, you can look at a man like Marx and look at some of the things, his analysis of a reality. For example, you know, he believed in class struggle, and he was very much of the opinion that in Western Europe is where this is likely to come, because he could see the biggest extremes in capitalism in Western Europe. And of course, it didn't happen like that. It happened in agricultural, feudal type society. So again, many mistakes in terms of his thinking, but you still have to give the time to at least understand and appreciate that there was analysis going on there of the problems in capitalism of the time, as indeed we see of the time today.
Thank you, Jamal. There's a gentleman up there. Unfortunately, we don't have a mic up there, so would you mind just...
Yeah, it's a question for both parties, but also for you. First question is, can I be filthy rich in a socialist system by my own achievements and hard work? And can I be the rightful owner of all my assets and property that I've acquired over hard work and achievement? And if not, then does that not contradict your statement about not stifling achievement? Because if my own ideals were to drive me to achieve all of that, then would that not stifle it?
Okay. This is to both parties? Or... Okay.
You know, again, the term "filthy rich" is maybe a little bit pejorative, but Islam does not have a problem with wealth generation. In fact, it is very important to have wealth generation. In my summing up, I was going to maybe touch a little bit more on this, but it's a good point here that is raised, and that is that, you know, if one is successful in one's business and the wealth is coming to you, and your business is getting ever larger, you know, we should not be imposing limits upon that in terms of saying, oh, it should only go to such and such a size and then the state should take over. Islam doesn't believe in this sort of nationalization of something once it, you know, I know that happened in Egypt. Gamal Abdel Nasser, he said, all of a sudden one night, he said, any business which has got more than 50 employees is now going to be state-run. This is very wrong. This is completely wrong. So Islam doesn't put limits on that ambition. There's a very nice hadith, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he said, if the son of Adam had 2 valleys of gold, he would want a third, and he would not be happy until he bites the dust. So there's like an instinct within humans to own things. It's not bad, but it just needs a certain degree of control. So the Islamic control is paying zakat, it's investing or reinvesting. You know, you have other people always coming, looking for opportunities for investment. So if you are rich, then you have an opportunity to put more back into your society by further reinvestment. The same thing in terms of spending, the same thing in terms of gifts. You know, the traders, the business people are always encouraged in Islam to blend it with sadaqah. What does that mean? It means blending your work, your success, with charitable actions. So this creates a much more rounded society. But again, my key point, circulation of wealth. This is what we need to seek, whatever society we're looking at. The more circulation you will get, the more success you will get for everyone.
I think that there is a point here. It's the nature of the riches one owns. If one owns riches which tie other people to producing wealth for oneself, then that is against socialist ideals. Now, it's not the kind of thing that can be transformed overnight. Maybe some of Jamal Abdel Nasser's reforms might be overambitious that way. It's an ideal towards which to work. Islam has ideals of a global political economy somewhere in the future towards which it strives. So does socialism. Socialism does not aim just to expropriate every little businessman around the place. Socialism in particular aims to preserve motivations, initiative, and all the other things that Jamal was saying. But obviously that is going to need constructing a new society. Well, Islam is going to need constructing a new society. So it's socialism, we're talking about a historical process, working towards a world in which, if you like, spiritual or idealistic motivation takes primary place, and material gain takes secondary place.
Thank you. I did say 15 minutes, we are running 19 minutes. I'll give about another couple of minutes for very quickly any last one or two questions. I want to move to the sides where I haven't. So there's a gentleman in the far end. Yeah. Keep your questions short, please.
I appreciated what Jamal had to say. He brought a lot of light into this subject. What's fascinating, the debate, unfortunately, tends to gear around economics. The reality is we need to extend this debate beyond the bounds of economics. In fact, Jamal, he mentioned a key point to do with the rule of law, source of law. There's a third point. My background's a lawyer and various degrees in law. That's irrelevant. But the point is this. I have had the misfortune to attend various courts of law. And perhaps my knowledge of law has extended. Yes, I've been to a whole load of universities and got various degrees in law. I did my bar exams, passed my statistics out. So what? It means absolutely nothing under our system. And I'll tell you why. Perhaps for the first time, everybody in this room, why I'm so angry with our current system. And the reason is very, very simple. We have an octopus in this system, which is never spoken about in the media. Very simply, there are 300,000 members in this country alone. It is the universal system in all the 193 sovereign jurisdictions around the world. And this is the reality. I'll tell you all, because I won't go into much detail. The subject is Freemasonry. And that is the reality. There are sources of law, but the judge is the ultimate arbiter, just as the Prime Minister is, and he determines whereby will there be integrity or not. And invariably what happens is a corruption, an impairment of integrity because of Freemasonry.
I'm sorry, sir. Right. Very quickly, there's a gentleman in the back. I'm going to give each person about 15 seconds. Yeah? No, in the back, yeah. You're going to have to wrap.
Hello, mate. Quickly, just wanted to say, when Lenin wanted to implement communist economic policies, when he wanted to implement war economy, after a couple of years, he had to drop that in NEP, which was basically an amalgamation of some form of communist, or basically a socialist policy rather than communist policy with regards to economics. So the war economy dropped, NEP comes in. And I think the same problem is with capitalist as well. If you look at capitalist ideology is not implemented properly, as it says, as it is in this philosophy, because the people won't be able to have that.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off. The gentleman in the middle and the gentleman at the front, and that's it. Over here in the middle of the round jacket. I apologize, 15 seconds.
My question is Dr. Hugo. I studied UCL for 3 years, economics, and you actually told me to money banking by 30 years. So you said that the root of a lot of these economic problems are the law is capitalism. That's what you said a second ago, and you praised Chavez as well. But if you look at Venezuela, Chavez's Venezuela, he made a lot of ad hoc economic decisions. So spending is unsustainable, inflation is quite high, 20%, it still is, and he hasn't dealt with a lot of structural economic problems. So to me, socialism looks a bit naff. And I mean, I'd say the same thing about capitalism too. Running a short time, so
okay, thank you. Sorry. Right, there was a person front over here with a blue naked top.
For want of clarity, I just want to know, is there anything you disagree with what Jamal has said in terms of interest rate, distribution, or gambling, or whatever? Is there anything, if at all, that you disagree with what Jamal has said? If you disagree, can you put forward your arguments? If you agree, can you confirm that you champion actually you champion Islamic economic system?
Okay, thank you very much. We're out of time, so I will let both of our panelists comment on some of the questions that have come up if they wish to. Some of them weren't clear who they were directed to, some of them were. And if time permits, at the end, after the second round of debate, we will come back to opening the floor up for both the debates. And of course, if everyone's still awake and following.
Well, really the last question was the big question, and a good question, and I'm very pleased it was asked. Though I'm not so pleased I have to give an answer because I don't really know what to say. A lot of what Jamal was saying was new to me, and as I say, I'm very clearly going to learn a lot more than I've taught tonight. I've only made some general statements about socialism, and I've listened with great interest to what Jamal has said about keeping distribution going. To me, it echoes a bit some of what Keynesian economics says against hoarding. Really, I wish I could give a clear answer. I'm going to have to go away and think about it, and I hope that such debates can continue. Well, that's an answer, but it's no answer. I'm sorry, and that really was the crucial question, I think.
Just a very quick comment about the gentleman in the back. Again, I agree that we have to look beyond just the economic, and of course this is an economic debate. But whether this is Bilderbergers or Freemasons or this conspiracy or that group, or, there could be truth in what he's saying. I'm not denying, I'm not an expert. But I would say, though, is that if we want to have change, we're seeing change, for example, now in the Muslim world. It's taking a certain course. In some cases it's come to a halt, in other cases it's still moving. But we need to have an ideological change. We need to have an ideological debate, and it's got to be mass-based. Whatever number of politicians may be dominating the political classes or so on, the masses, the public is the key thing, and this is what we're a part of. So it is very important for us to get our ideas from whichever political persuasion we have across to the masses, the public, and that the public would choose their own rulers and choose their own system.
Thank you, Jamal. We've got a couple of minutes for each speaker to make any further concluding remarks. Hugh, I believe that was your concluding remark.
That was really my concluding remark. Just thank you so much. I've learnt a lot. You've given me a lot to think about, and that's really all I can say in conclusion.
Jamal, a couple of minutes for your conclusion.
Yeah, again, just thank you very much. I think the level of discussion is very heartening. That I come here debate. But just to finish off on a couple of the points which Hugh raised. Means of production, again, a very distinctive matter. In Islam, there's no restriction on ownership of the means of production. There's very limited restriction on that. However, Islam does very clearly define between public, state, and private ownership. So, for example, the waterways, the oil, the gas, the electricity, these are all public properties, so they cannot be privatized as we've seen in the capitalist world. Equally, in the communist world or the socialist world, we don't have a restriction on ownership of the means of production. So if you want to have a factory, you can have a factory in Islam. You can have a very big factory. In fact, we've seen very large companies develop in the Muslim world. So this is encouraged and is very positive. So the notion of restricting the means of production is one area that we have big differences between secular liberal capitalists and indeed communists. My final word is that don't look at economy in a vacuum. You have to look at it from the question of the basis and this way of life that we have. And it's good to go into some of the details of communist and socialist thinking, because here we had thinkers that actually were tackling problems that we face today, whether it's Marx or Lenin and so on. I mean, one quote I didn't give earlier was one that Lenin said. He said the best way to destroy the capitalist system was to debauch the currency. Now, this is actually happening in front of our very eyes. Now, I don't know when or what's going to happen when we see currency implosions. We see currency wars going on now between the major nations. Japan, America, Europe, and so on. Where will this end? What will happen? But we need to get this debate out there in the open to say that there is alternatives to this currency war, this debauching of fiat currencies, which is a gold-silver standard. It is the predominant currency system that man has used over millennia. So why should we now be beholden to what Nixon has brought in 1971? This is the exception rather than the rule. So we need to have a much more open mind about these matters. Thank you very much for your time.